An 84-year-old woman was pulled from her bed in the dead of night by someone wearing a mask. Her pacemaker stopped transmitting at 2:28 in the morning. Blood was found outside her front door. And more than a month later, she is still gone. But this video is not really about the masked man. It is about the two men who were supposed to find him, and the decisions they made that raise questions nobody in power has been willing to answer. Welcome back to Cold Case History. I am going to walk you through every detail of this case: the footage, the forensics, the suspect behavior, the DNA, and the digital evidence trail. If you are new here, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We cover every update on cases like this one the moment they break. And trust me, this one is not finished breaking yet. Let's begin at the beginning. On the night of January 31st, Nancy Guthrie was driven home from a family dinner and confirmed safely inside her house at approximately 9:50 in the evening. The garage door closed. The lights went on, and for the next few hours, everything appeared normal. Then, at 1:47 in the morning, a masked figure appeared at her front door. At 2:28 a.m., the signal from her pacemaker went silent. When investigators arrived and searched her home, they found blood on the porch. They classified it as a crime scene. And then, according to multiple sources, they walked away from it far too soon. Nancy has now been missing for 33 days. And the investigation that was supposed to bring her home has instead become a case study in obstruction, ego, and decisions that every retired law enforcement professional who has commented publicly says they cannot explain through incompetence alone. Before we go any further, let me be clear about something important. No one has been charged in this case. No one has been named a suspect. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has officially cleared all members of the Guthrie family and their spouses. Sheriff Chris Nanos has called the family victims of cruel online speculation. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffender has publicly stated she does not believe the family is being investigated as suspects. What you are about to hear is drawn entirely from documented decisions, on-the-record statements, and questions raised by retired FBI agents, former department commanders, and the sheriff's own deputies. These are not accusations. They are accountability questions. And at 33 days, they deserve real answers. Let us start with the decision that reveals the most about how Chris Nanos operates. Not because it is the most dramatic, but because of what it says about every choice that came after it. When Nancy disappeared and search efforts were being organized, a nonprofit organization called the United Cajun Navy reached out to the Pima County Sheriff's Department and asked to help. The United Cajun Navy is not a group of amateur enthusiasts. They are a Louisiana-based 501c3 founded in 2018. They have deployed to more than 20 disaster zones across the United States. They have assisted law enforcement and search teams when dozens of children went missing during severe flooding in Kerrville, Texas. House Speaker Mike Johnson has publicly praised their work. These are trained, experienced, insured professionals. Their incident commander, Josh Gill, traveled to Tucson personally. He stood outside Nancy's home and spoke to Fox News Digital. He said his organization simply wanted to provide resources to help bring Mrs. Guthrie home. And their formal proposal to the Sheriff's Department reflected exactly that. It included cadaver dogs, canines specifically trained to detect human remains in desert environments, underground spaces, drainage channels, and water sources. It included thermal UAV drones capable of scanning terrain that ground teams physically cannot reach. It included tracking canines trained to follow scent across the type of rugged desert that surrounds Tucson. It included trained ground volunteers, many of them retired law enforcement. It included full insurance coverage. And critically, it included a media protocol that stated the Cajun Navy would issue no independent press releases. All communications to the media would require approval from the sheriff's office first. They were not asking to lead the investigation. They were not asking for credit. They were handing the sheriff a free, professional, fully insured search and rescue operation and asking only to be pointed in the right direction. The sheriff's office issued a statement. It said that volunteer search groups had inquired about being in the area, and that per the sheriff, they were asked to give investigators the space they need to do their work. They added that the work is best left to professionals. The Cajun Navy is made up of professionals. And they were not the only group turned away. Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, the searching mothers of Sonora, came from Mexico. These are women who have spent years searching desert terrain for their own children, victims of cartel violence. They understand what decomposition looks like in arid climates. They understand that landscape better than almost anyone alive. They came because the terrain surrounding Nancy's home is exactly what they have spent their lives learning to search. They were also sidelined. Here is where the accounts fracture into a direct contradiction. A spokesperson for the Sheriff's Department told Fox News Digital that the agency was not even aware that the Cajun Navy had made an offer. But Josh Gill told journalist Brian Inton something completely different. He said the sheriff's office was well aware of their proposal. He said his team had been sitting in a holding pattern waiting for an approval that never arrived. Both accounts cannot be true. Either the department failed to receive a detailed formal proposal during one of the most high-profile missing persons cases in Arizona history, which would represent a catastrophic internal communication failure, or the department received the proposal, turned it down, and then denied knowing about it. Sergeant Aaron Cross, president of the Puma County Deputies Organization, said he was genuinely surprised the sheriff had not accepted the offer. He pointed specifically to the vast stretches of desert west of Tucson, areas where, as he noted, criminal evidence gets disposed of regularly. He referenced a past local case where a missing girl's remains were found just off a desert road, exactly the kind of terrain the Cajun Navy was equipped and ready to search. If this were the only strange decision Nanos had made, you could perhaps attribute it to stubbornness or an oversized sense of territorial authority. But it is not the only decision. It is the first piece of a pattern. Go back to the crime scene itself. After investigators found blood on Nancy's porch and classified her home as a crime scene, the initial search lasted approximately 20 hours. Sources indicate the scene was released prematurely. Investigators returned to the property multiple times in the weeks that followed as new areas of interest were identified. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffender stated that if she had been leading this investigation, that crime scene would still be sealed. She warned that repeated entries compromised chain of custody, introduced the risk of contamination, and fundamentally weakened the integrity of physical evidence. She described what this will mean for any future prosecution, a field day for a defense attorney. Paul Hubel, a former Chicago police officer and private investigator, told Radar Online the scene had become grossly contaminated. He pointed out that Nancy's blood was not publicly disclosed for 4 days and that 2 journalists had reportedly been allowed access to the property. When Nanos was asked directly about concerns over evidence integrity in a kidnapping case that had drawn national attention, his response was 4 words. He said he would let the court worry about it. That is the lead investigator. Not a defense, not an explanation, a dismissal. Then there is the DNA. The FBI wanted biological evidence from the crime scene sent to Quantico, Virginia, home to one of the most technologically advanced forensic laboratories in the world. Nanos sent it to a private lab in Florida instead. His explanation was that the Florida lab had been used from the beginning of the investigation and that splitting the evidence between facilities could create conflicting results. The outcome, the DNA has been described as mixed, meaning multiple genetic profiles are tangled together in the sample. Weeks passed with no usable identification. A Cody's database search returned no hits. Genetic genealogy, the forensic method that has cracked cold cases across the country, requires a clean, isolated DNA profile to work effectively. That clean profile does not yet exist because the sample it would come from was never sent to the facility best equipped to process it. And then there is the plane. On the day Nancy disappeared, there was a 3-hour delay before a search aircraft with thermal imaging capabilities could get into the air over the desert terrain surrounding her home. 3 hours in a kidnapping investigation, during what every law enforcement professional agrees is the most critical window of time. The reason for that delay: Nanos had gotten into a conflict with the only deputy in the department certified to fly that aircraft weeks earlier and had reassigned him to street patrol. The one person qualified to operate the most important search tool available was removed from the position before this case even began, and the sheriff had not addressed the gap that removal created. Now, none of this emerged from political opponents or media speculation. The most damning characterization of how Nanos operates came from inside his own department. Richard Castigar Jr. spent 46 years working for the Puma County Sheriff's Department before retiring in 2023 as chief deputy. He told the Daily Mail that Nanos is a quintessential micromanager who is not effective. He said the case should have been handed to the FBI 2 weeks into the investigation and that all evidence should have gone to Quantico from the beginning. He described Nanos as someone who maintains a tight inner circle and refuses to let anyone outside of it have meaningful access because he cannot stand the idea of surrendering control to the FBI. And then Castigar said the single sentence that reframes every decision Nanos has made since February 1st. He said Nanos has great disdain for the FBI because they investigated his department in 2016, and he is still carrying that grudge. The FBI began looking into the Puma County Sheriff's Department in 2015 over allegations of misuse of civil asset forfeiture funds. Nanos himself was never charged, but the sheriff at the time was indicted. And Nanos lost the election that followed in 2016. According to his own former chief deputy, That personal grudge is now actively shaping how a kidnapping investigation involving an 84-year-old woman is being run. Multiple law enforcement sources told the Daily Mail that Nanos and a small inner circle are deliberately limiting what the FBI is being given access to. One source described it as restricted to the thought processes of 3 men who are keeping everything from the FBI and simply not sharing. Those 3 men, according to the source, are Nanos, Chief Jesus Lopez, and Captain Juan Carlos Navarro. Everyone else in the department is being told what to do with no voice in the actual direction of the investigation. A separate source told the Daily Mail that the FBI's hands are effectively tied because Nanos answers to no one above him and the 2 agencies are separate. The FBI cannot compel him. They can only ask. This is the environment inside that department. Nanos won his most recent re-election in 2024 by 481 votes. Before that election, while early voting was already underway, he placed his opponent, Lieutenant Heather Lapin, a 19-year veteran of the department, on administrative leave. Lapin has since resigned and accused Nanos of subjecting her to what she described as a campaign of torture. He reportedly did the same to Sergeant Aaron Cross, the union president, who has since filed a lawsuit against the county. The Puma County Board of Supervisors formally requested that the Arizona and U.S. Attorneys General conduct an independent investigation into Nanos's conduct in the period leading up to that election. The board also separately requested a meeting with Nanos regarding his handling of an alleged sexual assault of a female employee by her supervisor, with the deputy's organization claiming he failed to properly investigate that matter, which resulted in yet another request for an outside investigation. An anonymous deputy told Radar Online that the department's most senior homicide investigator has only 3 years of experience in that division because Nanos keeps driving experienced people out. Bob Krieger, a former Puma County Sheriff's lieutenant with 25 years of SWAT experience, went on the Surviving Though podcast and said he was both angry and heartbroken. He said he cared about the department's reputation and hated what it had become. He revealed that an internal morale poll showed 98% of the department gave Nanos a vote of no confidence. Not a handful of disgruntled employees. 98% of his own people. And Krieger said Nanos ignored the result entirely. Krieger also addressed the press conferences, saying Nanos was not the right person to be delivering those messages, that he frequently lost his train of thought and became emotional. After the early briefings were widely criticized, Nanos stopped holding press conferences altogether and began limiting himself to controlled, one-on-one interviews with outlets he personally selected, where reporters cannot ask follow-up questions he is not prepared for. Missing persons specialist Michael Gould told the Daily Express that Nanos has created confusion and actively fueled conspiracy theories through inconsistent public communications. This is the portrait painted not by political enemies or internet commentators, but by the sheriff's own people, active deputies, retired commanders, his own former chief deputy who served 4.5 decades in that building, union leadership, the county board of supervisors, and 98% of the officers who work for him every day. The question at the end of all of this is not simply whether Nanos is incompetent or whether his ego has gotten in the way of good police work. He may be both of those things. The question is whether there is a specific, identifiable reason, beyond incompetence and ego, why the sheriff of Puma County has actively obstructed every outside effort to locate an 84-year-old woman who was abducted from her own home. And if that reason exists, who does it protect? If you're still here, subscribe, because cases like this only work when people stay and tell us where you're watching from. I love seeing my global family represent. Drop your country or city in the comments. Now let us turn to the second man. Because the sheriff's pattern becomes a different kind of problem the moment you place it alongside the unresolved questions surrounding Nancy's inner circle. Tommaso Cioni is Italian-born, married to Annie Guthrie, Nancy's daughter and Savannah Guthrie's sister. He lives in the Tucson area, minutes from Nancy's home. On the evening of January 31st, he drove Nancy home after dinner and confirmed her safely inside at around 9:50 p.m. He waited until the garage door fully closed before driving away. And the Puma County Sheriff's Department has officially cleared him, along with all other Guthrie family members and their spouses. That clearance is on the record. Nanos has called the family victims. Coffender has stated she does not believe the family is being treated as suspects. The union president has confirmed they have been cooperative throughout. On March 2nd, Tommaso was seen alongside Annie and Savannah placing flowers and a handwritten card at the memorial outside Nancy's home. The card read that though they were surrounded by so much darkness and uncertainty, their love burned bright. That grief is real. That clearance carries weight. But official clearance as a suspect is not the same thing as publicly demonstrated forensic elimination. And in a case where several investigative details remain unexplained, the gap between what has been said and what has been proven through evidence creates questions that accountability requires to be asked. The first question is about knowledge. Coffender stated that whoever entered Nancy's home that night had a deep, intimate familiarity with her life. They knew the interior layout of the house. They knew which floodlights were broken. They knew where the security cameras were positioned and how to avoid them. They knew the nightly routine and the schedule. They knew she was alone. And they knew where Nancy kept her Apple Watch inside the home, in a location that Harvey Levin described as somewhere you would not immediately think to look. FBI Special Agent in Charge Heath Johnke confirmed that detail was accurate. That is not the knowledge you accumulate from watching a house from across the street. That is inside knowledge. And someone who visited regularly, who lived minutes away, who drove Nancy home on the very night she was taken, would by definition have had all of it. Retired FBI profiler Jim Clementi told Enton that the abductor's knowledge could just as plausibly have come from a tangential connection, a pool cleaner, a landscaper, a delivery driver, anyone to whom Nancy may have casually mentioned that she lived alone and would be home that particular night. Multiple people could have possessed the same detailed familiarity without any connection to the family at all. But the overlap between what the perpetrator demonstrated and what someone in Tommaso's position would naturally know is a question the official clearance has not publicly addressed. The second question is about the car. Annie and Tommaso's vehicle remains in a police evidence lot. It has not been returned. On February 27th, CBS 5 crime journalist Brianna Whitney reported that the Puma County Sheriff's Department confirmed the vehicle was still part of the active investigation. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell argued on the Megyn Kelly show that retaining the car of a family member for this length of time was highly unusual, that in her career, she had processed hundreds of vehicles, and the timeline here stood out. Coffender addressed this directly on March 1st in a video she published specifically to push back on theories that the car's continued retention indicated the family was suspected. She made a specific legal distinction that matters enormously. The searches of the family's property were consent searches. She explained that if investigators had probable cause, they would never rely on consent because consent searches are far more vulnerable to challenge in court. The fact that they asked rather than compelled is, she argued, the strongest indicator that probable cause did not exist. But she also offered theories about why the car is still being held. She suggested investigators may be examining whether a GPS tracking device was placed on the vehicle by the abductor. She proposed that someone may have followed Tommaso's car from Annie's house to Nancy's home specifically to establish the moment when Nancy would be alone. She also suggested investigators may be looking for fingerprints or DNA from anyone who came into contact with that vehicle externally. All of those theories frame the car as evidence of a threat originating from outside the family. But the car is still there. And the question of what specifically investigators are still looking for, more than a month after the family was officially cleared, has not been publicly answered. The third question is geographic. Coffender noted that investigators canvassed the neighborhood surrounding Annie and Tommaso's home, not Nancy's neighborhood, which would be the standard approach in a case centered on the victim's property. Megyn Kelly said on her show that she believed investigators kept returning to that neighborhood because they were trying to establish whether something originated there. If the tracker theory is correct and someone followed Tommaso's car that night to determine timing and access, then the cameras along that route become essential evidence. That would explain why that neighborhood was canvassed. But the detail remains documented and unaddressed publicly. The fourth question is about timing. Clementi said the perpetrator knew Nancy would be home and vulnerable on that specific night. That level of precise, timely knowledge is extraordinarily specific. The people who knew it with certainty at the moment it was true were the people sitting around the dinner table that evening, Annie, Tommaso, and anyone they may have mentioned it to in passing. That information could have originated with Nancy herself, shared innocently with a service worker or a casual acquaintance. It could have passed through the family circle to someone entirely outside of it without any harmful intent. There are multiple ways that chain of information could have traveled from the dinner table to the perpetrator. But the starting point of that chain is the dinner table. And the question of how the specific knowledge of Nancy's availability that night reached the person who used it has not been answered publicly. The fifth question is the one that connects both men. Is there any social, financial, or political connection between anyone in Nancy's immediate circle and anyone inside the Puma County Sheriff's Office? There is no confirmed link between Nanos and Tommaso Cioni. There is no evidence they know each other. There is no documented basis for concluding that the sheriff's decisions have been shaped by a desire to protect anyone connected to the family. But the convergence of two separate patterns in the same case makes the question unavoidable. A sheriff whose documented behavior has consistently slowed, complicated, and impeded the investigation. And a set of unresolved questions about the person closest to Nancy on the night she was taken that the official clearance has not publicly resolved. When those two patterns exist in the same investigation, when the man running it appears to be obstructing it, and the man who last confirmed the victim was alive has not been transparently eliminated through publicly disclosed forensic evidence, asking whether those two facts are connected is not conspiracy thinking. It is accountability. Here is the framework that pulls everything together. When you cannot explain a pattern of decisions through incompetence alone, when those decisions consistently produce outcomes that favor delay over resolution, control over collaboration, and silence over transparency, you stop asking what went wrong and you start asking who benefits. Who benefits from a crime scene that was released early and re-entered multiple times? A future defense attorney arguing contamination. Who benefits from DNA sitting in a private Florida lab for months instead of being processed at the FBI's most advanced facility? Anyone whose genetic profile might exist within that mixed sample. Who benefits from a professional volunteer search team being turned away from thousands of acres of open desert? Anyone who does not want certain terrain searched. Who benefits from a sheriff who retreats from press conferences and grants access only to journalists in formats where difficult follow-up questions cannot be asked? Anyone who does not want the questions asked at all. Maybe every one of those benefits is coincidental. Maybe every decision has an innocent explanation rooted in bureaucratic friction and a personality that cannot share control. That is entirely possible. But at 33 days, with an 84-year-old woman still missing, coincidence becomes a harder argument to sustain with every day that passes without an answer. The investigation has not stopped moving. 100 FBI agents have been deployed at various stages. More than 23,000 tips have been processed. Hundreds of thousands of vehicles have been reviewed. Cell tower data is being analyzed, and Nanos confirmed it has helped eliminate individuals while acknowledging that a significant amount of that data still needs to be worked through. Google is extracting footage from Nest cameras in the area. A retired DEA agent named Jerry Kelly Snyder, who leads a nonprofit called Find Me dedicated to locating missing persons, has joined the effort. And the forensic path that multiple experts believe will eventually solve this case, genetic genealogy, remains active. Jim Clemente was direct about where this ends. He said this case will be solved. He said he has no question in his mind because of the surveillance footage and because the perpetrator was not forensically sophisticated enough to prevent his DNA from being left at the scene. He pointed to the exposed tattoo, the uncovered lower face, and biological material left inside the home. When genetic genealogy produces a name, and every expert consulted believes it eventually will, that name will answer every question this video has raised. If the name has no connection to the family or to the sheriff's office, then both patterns were coincidence. If it does, every decision Nanos made, every resource he declined, every delay he allowed, and every person he shielded will be measured against it. Nanos spoke to NBC on March 3rd. He said he believes investigators are getting closer. He said he personally believes Nancy is alive. He addressed the backpack found in the surveillance footage, a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiking pack sold exclusively at Walmart, acknowledging it may not have been purchased directly from a retail store. He confirmed that investigators still cannot say definitively whether one of the Nest camera images in the evidence was taken on an earlier date than initially assumed. And he said there is so much that everybody wants to know, but that sharing it would be irresponsible. These updates are being delivered in controlled one-on-one conversations where the format does not allow a journalist to push past the first answer. In a one-on-one interview, the sheriff decides what gets said. A sheriff who controls what gets said controls the narrative. And a sheriff who controls the narrative controls what the public is allowed to demand. His own former chief deputy said he is a quintessential micromanager who holds a personal grudge against the agency best equipped to solve this case. His own former SWAT commander said 98% of the department gave him a vote of no confidence and that he hates what the department has become. His own deputies have called the handling of this case a national embarrassment. The County Board of Supervisors has requested external investigations into his conduct on multiple occasions. And political pressure on an elected sheriff who won his last election by fewer than 500 votes is the one force that bureaucratic stubbornness cannot withstand indefinitely. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She was taken from her home in the middle of the night by someone who knew the exact layout of her house, which lights were working and which were not, where her cameras were and how to avoid them, and where she kept the one device that might have helped someone find her. The Cajun Navy offered cadaver dogs, thermal drones, trained ground teams, full insurance, and total media silence in exchange for nothing more than permission to help. The searching mothers of Sonora brought decades of desert search experience across an international border. Both were turned away. The one deputy certified to fly the thermal search plane had been reassigned over a personal conflict before this case ever began. The DNA went to a lab the FBI did not recommend. The crime scene was released and re-entered until a former FBI agent said it had become a liability for any future prosecution. The sheriff's own former chief deputy said the case should have been given to the FBI 2 weeks in and accused Nanos of letting a 9-year grudge shape a kidnapping investigation. And when Nanos was asked about concerns over evidence integrity, he said he would let the court worry about it. The family has been officially cleared, but the car is still in the evidence lot. The question of how the perpetrator obtained such a detailed, intimate knowledge of Nancy's home, her habits, and her security setup has not been publicly answered. Investigators canvassed the son-in-law's neighborhood specifically, and the dinner table, the place where the precise knowledge of Nancy's vulnerability on that specific night would have originated, remains the unaddressed starting point of a chain that led to an 84-year-old woman being taken from her bed. 2 men, 2 patterns. One runs the investigation and has placed obstruction at every turn where collaboration was possible. One was the last confirmed person with Nancy and has been cleared without the public being shown how. Neither pattern constitutes proof of guilt, but both patterns constitute a demand for transparency. And at 33 days, transparency is the one thing this investigation has refused to provide. The families of missing persons deserve investigators who want the truth more than they want control. Nancy deserves that. Savannah deserves that. And this community, the one that has watched its sheriff turn away professional search teams, delay critical forensics, retreat from accountability, and call of family victims while keeping their vehicle locked in an evidence lot, deserves real answers. Not press releases. Not controlled interviews. Answers. The DNA will eventually produce a name. The traffic cameras will eventually produce a vehicle. The digital forensics will eventually produce a complete timeline. And when they do, every decision the sheriff made will be measured against the outcome. Every resource he turned away. Every delay he allowed. Every question he refused to answer. And every unresolved detail surrounding the inner circle, the knowledge, the car, the neighborhood canvas, the dinner table, will finally have context. Until then, 2 questions remain unanswered. What is the sheriff protecting? And what does official clearance actually mean when the supporting evidence has never been made public? Those are not rhetorical. They are accountability questions. And Nancy Guthrie, missing for 33 days, taken by someone who knew her life better than any stranger could have, deserves to have them answered. If you know anything at all about this case, the tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. The current reward stands at $1.2 million. The call is completely anonymous. The Puma County tip line is 520-351-4900. You can also submit tips directly at tips.fbi.gov. Every tip matters. One detail that seems small to you could be the detail that brings Nancy home. Now here is what I need from you before you leave this video. If this case has stayed with you the way it has stayed with us, hit that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds and it tells the algorithm that this story matters, that Nancy matters, and that the questions being asked here deserve a wider audience. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already, because we are not finished with this case. The moment the DNA comes back, the moment a name surfaces, the moment the sheriff is forced to answer publicly, we will be here covering it in full. Share this video because every share puts this story in front of someone who might have a piece of the puzzle, someone who might recognize the backpack, the tattoo, the car, the route. And drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans every continent, and every single one of you being here, staying here until the end, keeping pressure on the people who owe this community answers. That is what accountability actually looks like in practice. We will keep showing up as long as you do. Because Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. And the truth, the full, unobstructed, uncontrolled truth, is the only thing that will bring her there.